My name is Michael McSheehan. I work with a national center called the S.W.I.F.T Center, Schoolwide Integrated Framework for Transformation. We are an OSAP, Office of Special Ed Programs, funded center who are in our last few months of official funding on that project. We've been a 5-year award to work with 5 states, 64 schools, 17 school districts around the country, taking a look at what happens when you, instead of working kind of child by child, take a school-wide and district-wide approach to change that lays out MTSS as an organizing force in schools and align your resources, your vision, your priorities for effective and efficient implementation efforts in schools. My role within the center is I'm the coordinator of technical assistance, which means that I work alongside of our providers who are in each of the states working with the schools and the districts. So I try to help kind of check the alignment of how we're providing that service, try to provide a model for that service, and then document the impact, the fidelity and the impact of that service, as well as kind of monitoring how our schools and districts and states feel about that service. So we do pretty regular routine quality, usefulness, relevance surveys to our partners, and part of my role is to work with each of our technical assistance providers to personalize how they're engaging each school in each district. So while we have a template of how we deliver our side of the partnership, each of our providers works really hard to kind of tailor locally based on what's important in that context. Today's session, as I understand it, and we can co-construct along the way, is to have a focus on inclusive practices with that braiding of academic and behavior supports for students, with an eye toward all students. So the content focus area is MTSS, Multi-Tiered System of Support. And we're going to be unpacking various components of that. Our hope for kind of big learning objectives by the end of the day is that you'll leave here with some shared understanding of essential components within a multi-tiered system of support, and some understanding of where there's flexibility within those components and how they're put together locally in your school, your district, for application. We'll also dive into a little bit of some specific practices within those broad components. And I'm leaving flexibility there in how I word that based on what comes up in our first round of work in the morning. I may tailor and adjust what we do in the afternoon based on what I'm hearing for feedback. So in your PowerPoint handouts, you'll see that there's boatloads of information. And we're going to navigate what we need to in there. I'm all for providing you more resources than we actually get through because you all are going to pick up what you need from those. So there's probably much more than we'll ever cover in one day, and that's purposeful. That's okay. So you have 2 PowerPoints, and I'd like to start with a set of materials that you don't have just to mess with your heads. Because I want to start with what we asked you about before you came today. And I want to share with you what you said, what your results were. So in preparation for conversations about differentiated instruction, response to intervention and instruction, positive behavioral interventions and supports, and multi-tiered system of supports, lots of letters, lots of fun little systems there. I wanted you to see what you think you know, what you think you practice, and what you think your schools have adopted and are implementing. So that you get a picture of the diversity in this room, and you also have some appreciation for the knowledge that already exists in this room, according to what you've said. Y'all think you know a lot, and that's awesome. So we're going to be leveraging that as we go through the day. So the first, there were 3 questions basically about each of those 4 areas. And they flowed in terms of what's your knowledge base, what do you practice, what's your school doing, okay, what's your system doing. So at the top here are the strongly agrees, somewhat agrees, and then neither agree nor disagree, which I found to be a fascinating option, and then somewhat disagree and strongly disagree. And the numbers across the bottom of each of the scales are the number of people who selected that item. So a longer bar represents more people having said strongly, somewhat agree. Okay. So the first question was about knowledge in differentiated instruction, and what you all said was that for the most part, you know what's going on with differentiated instruction. One person is really not sure, so that's okay. I have practiced differentiated instruction in a school, right? One thing to know something, another thing to actually go do it in the system. So you'll see the drop. Yes, I know it. No, not so much on doing it. So we've got content knowledge versus procedural knowledge there. So we've got a drop down to lots more people saying they neither agree nor disagree with actually practicing differentiation in their schools, and one person who somewhat disagrees. And in terms of your schools having an agreed upon school-wide framework or essential components of differentiated instruction, pretty clear drop there, right? So we're seeing this shift, and this is representative of a national shift that's happening, and part of why I opened with the introduction about just my work within our S.W.I.F.T center, because there's a different impact on practice when you're doing it in isolation versus when you've got everybody on the same page with you, right? Huge difference in how you allocate resources, how you're striving to improve your practice, whether or not you have models in your school that you can look to where you agree on what it should look like at the end of the day. So significant drop there. So that tells me when we do our work today, I'm going to put some emphasis on this part. Right, let's see if we can't help lift this up for you. What would be the strategies, if you so desire, to have a school-wide adopted framework for differentiation? How would you get there? We'll just lay out that path for you. Next set of components around response to intervention, response to instruction and intervention. Different people call it different things. If you're in Pennsylvania, you say RTII. If you're in New Hampshire, you don't say RTI anymore. And if you're in certain states, it's like it's a swear word. So you all seem to know, or at least think you know, what some components are around response to instruction and intervention. Lots of agreement here with a little bit of unsure and one person somewhat disagreeing with that. Your practice in your schools drops a little bit, not much. So it would suggest to me that most of you are practicing some version of RTII in your schools. Yeah? Sure, yes, be confident, it's okay. I won't turn you in. And my school has an agreed upon framework for RTI. We see the drop again, right? So lots of you individually feel like you're practicing RTII, but we're not sure if that's actually aligned to what is desired within your particular context, because that's not identified and agreed upon yet. But still, lots of people feeling like they do have school-wide frameworks. So that's notable here. That's higher than on differentiation. Now, if we move over to PBIS, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Support, which is kind of a set thing, right? A known model with kind of agreed upon essential factors in it. We've got lots of agreement that you all know what the heck you're talking about when you talk about PBIS. Your practice of it drops pretty dramatically. We lost several people here on whether or not I've practiced it. So maybe I've done a workshop on it, maybe I've seen other people practicing, but I'm not practicing it day in and day out. So that's interesting, but still yet lots of you who are. So we're going to leverage that procedural knowledge as we go through the day. And again, the same drop on having an agreed upon school-wide framework for PBIS. Same dip here that we were experiencing before, but lots of you are saying you also do. So we've got about 50-50 split here. Now we go over to multi-tiered system of support. Knowledge is there on strongly agree and somewhat agree, and some of you not sure or somewhat disagreeing with that. By the end of today, I'm hoping that that'll all be up. Practicing MTSS in your schools, we're seeing the drop again. Okay, so we're learning about it, but I'm not sure that that's what I practice. And then in terms of having an agreed upon framework in your schools, this was the largest drop, right? So now we've just got a handful of you who say, yeah, we have a school-wide MTSS framework that we're adhering to and trying to fully implement. And the majority of you saying, yeah, not so much on that one. Okay. So that's just to share with you and be transparent about kind of what you gave for input to prepare today, because that informed the selection of materials for today. It's like I'm using data to differentiate the instruction, just trying to provide that little model there for you. So we've got knowledgeable folks in the room. We've got some of you who are engaged in a practice and less so on the school-wide frameworks. What we're learning in our center, what we've learned over the last 4 years, what we're seeing in other states and other implementation efforts around the country, is that having an agreed upon framework in your school changes the conversation completely. We're going to get into talking about time and resources in terms of personnel, materials, focus of energy in a day. And all of that shifts when you have a school-wide framework versus when you yourself are just trying to do a practice in isolation. So we want to shift that a little bit here in Indiana. Now I want to start off with tapping the knowledge in the room and getting you moving around a little bit. How many of you have done work with Paula Kluth before? A little bit? Okay, seeing her on a slide maybe. Paula's big on joyful learning and lots of activities in her learning. And I really appreciate that about her and don't do it as often as I would like. And so I purposely pulled in something that I learned from Paula Kluth for today's session, and that is to use trios as a way of building and sharing information. I was also told by the organizers that you all, this is your first time coming together statewide, so you don't know some other people in the room, and I wanted to set you up to be able to meet other people in your room so you could network a little bit. Find out who's got good information and who you want to sit with next to for lunch. So we're going to do a trio, which is going to involve a little bit of rebuilding our room a little bit, we think. In a trio format, you create sets of 3 chairs, teams of 3, if you will. There's no requirement for knowing each other. You just have to remember your number. Am I a number 1? Am I a number 2? Am I a number 3? So that's really the challenge to get you started here. So we're going to do a little reconfiguring of the room because if we only have 3 per table, we're not going to have enough space for the trios. So what we're going to do is probably do table, 3 chairs off to the side, table, 3 chairs off to the side. I'm looking at my organizers who are going to help make this happen. If you're at a table where you already only have 3 people, you're good. So you all can just like sit back and enjoy watching everybody else figure out the logistics here, right? So if you're at a table of 2 next to a table of 4, then we're just going to have one person move back so that we have a 3 and a 3. And where we have 4s, 5s, and 6s, what we'll do is we'll pull 3 chairs out to the side so that we can do a zigzag down a column. So that we have 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 for each row. My organizers are giving me supportive nods, which means they understand and they're about to help you move your chairs. So if you are at a table that has 3, you're good. If you're at a table that has more than 3, you want to stand up and identify 2 other, you want to get into groups of 3 and get a collection of chairs that you can sit at. So let's do that first. Once you have your trio, raise your hands and put your eyes on me so I know who else we need to get settled here. Now what we want you to do is look to see where you're going to move. So this row, you're going to snake toward me. Then you're going to snake up the middle. So if you're in this row, you're going in that direction. Unless you're at the last table, then you're crossing over and you're snaking back down to the front. You at the front, the last couple of trio, you need a 3rd person. She's in the bathroom. We just recorded that. You're going to move back to the loop up there. So the snake runs from where Jolly is standing, down this way, up the middle, down the third row, and then back to the front where Jolly is standing, or the back where Jolly is standing. It's easier to do it just clockwise, but heck, let's make it messy. In a trio activity, 2 people are going to move and 1 person's going to stay seated. So quickly identify who's a 1, who's a 2, who's a 3 at your trio. Pick a number. Got him? Okay. So 1s, after your discussion, you're going to move 1. You're going to move 1 group up or down the chain. So you're here, you're going to move over there. Those at the back, you're going to move over there. You're going to move over there, okay? 2s are going to move 2 groups. So you're going to skip a group and go to the next one. So whoever the 2 is here, you're going to skip. Which side are you on? I want you on that side. Great. Okay. So you're going to skip their trio and go to that trio. Okay? Okay, so you have 2 trios at the same table. You're messing with me. All right, it's fine. We're going to make it work. So you're the first trio in that row. Purple sweater. I don't know your name yet, but we'll bond. And you're going to come down 2, which means skipping them and going to the next table. You got it. Okay. So let's before we start talking, let's actually try the movement out. Shall we practice together? 3s, you're going to remain seated. Everybody move 1 or 2 based on your number. I'm going to put a prompt up on the window, on the screen. You're going to discuss that prompt in your group. I'm going to only give you like a minute and a half. So just vomit as much information as you can into the group in that short period of time. This is just to generate some knowledge. There's no quiz after this. Ready? Go. One, 2, 3, eyes on me. You're practicing movement. Transition again, and then I'm going to put a new prompt up. So remember, this aisle's coming toward me, this aisle's going back, and you're going over. You're going to have 3 trials at this. Second time was better than the first. You're on your way up. Practice matters. You ready for your new? If you're ready, show me your hands. If you're really ready, put them both up. Okay, here we go. Same discussion, minute and a half. Okay, you ready? Third time, move. And nobody needed any tier 2 support. Look at that. Y'all just made it work. It's like you're professionals. I don't know what to do. Okay. Ready for the third question? Any guesses? Go. Okay. Going to be one more shift, and I'll tell you now, when you get to your next shift, you're going to summarize. So it's your next rotation in your trio, because you've now had 3 conversations about this, and hopefully some common things are bubbling up, and if not, we're going to reteach to those. At each of your tables, there's a variety of things that you can write on. There are notepads, there are IEP Resource Center post-it pads, and there are yellow post-it pads. pick whichever one works for you. In your next trio, make a list of no more than 5 essential components of MTSS. No more than 5. Try to use single and double syllable words, no multisyllabic words. We've had enough of those already, right? 5 essential components, minimize use of multisyllabic words. Rotate. If you have your list already, raise your hands. Okay, 30 seconds. Wrap that up. Use keywords. It's okay. Spelling does not count. We're going to go through the snake. You're going to read off at least one component. Not at least. You're going to read off only one component. Point to the next group. They'll read off a different component. And so on, and so on, and so on. Don't repeat anything that's been said before you. If all the groups before you, and you've got a good shot at this, if all the groups before you have said everything on your list, you're golden. You just give them a good, way to go, good work, folks. You clearly got it right because that's what we had, right? So we're just going to build this, and then I'm going to cycle through. So if everything you have on your list has already been said, you just say, give them a little thumbs up. And then I'm going to come back to see if there's anything else. Okay. I'm going to try to type these as you say them, which is why I asked for no multisyllabic words, so you don't make fun of my spelling. We'll ask for the group in the back there to start us off. One component. Any other components? Awesome list. Good work. There's a boatload of knowledge in this room. We're going to be leveraging this. So your list here is pretty impressive. And several of you were giving me that look when I started the activity. When you saw the first prompt, you're like, but that's what I came to learn today. I don't know those yet. And what this shows is that you actually are bringing a lot to the conversation about multi-tiered system of support. A multi-tiered system of support is not necessarily a brand new thing. It carries forward a lot of the good practices that you all have been using for a long time. Brings them together and integrates them in a slightly different way with particular attention to certain components. I want to do a little something with the list that you generated to kind of do some cognitive clarity around how I think about an essential component or essential element as different from an implementation support. Because you're going to have an implementation support for anything you're trying to get in place. And so I'm just going to kind of go through and identify some different things here from your list, because it's a great list. Okay. So family engagement. We know we're going to be concerned about family engagement no matter what we're doing, and it is an essential component when thinking about tiered instruction for our students. So we're going to leave that as an essential component. Inclusive can be both essential component and can be a philosophy or principle, guiding principle with your work. So one of the other comments down here was all students, and we can think about those in relationship to one another. We can leverage a multi-tiered system of support to promote utilization of inclusive practices. We can leverage a multi-tiered system of support to address the strengths and needs of all students, whether or not you're on an IEP, you're an English language learner, you're an advanced mathematician, you're a struggling reader, each and every student. We can leverage the framework of a multi-tiered system of support to meet you where you're at and figure out what the next best steps are for you instructionally. Administration, leading, and directing. I'm going to bold the components. Administration, leading, and directing is an implementation support. We need that no matter what we're trying to do in our schools, right? So whether or not I'm trying to get in place differentiation, executive functioning strategies, enhancing my family engagement, I need administration on board, helping to lead, hopefully through distributed leadership and directing that system. So I'm going to not bold that yet. We are going to come back to it, though. Buyin, another essential implementation support, right? That's how we're going to get our what in place. So an implementation equation that I use often that comes from the field of implementation science is what times how times where equals our why, equals our outcomes. So the what is that usable practice or initiative or framework that you want to get implemented. And then the how and the where are leveraged to accomplish that what. So buy-in is a how. Buy-in is a where. All the people in my school, I want buy-in from them. So that's going to affect where we're doing it. Academic and behavior support, component. Integrated data system, component. Targeted intervention, component. And I'm going to offer you some different language around targeted intervention. You're going to hear me use words like supplemental instruction and targeted intervention. And it's a slight nuance that's going to break down this notion of 3 separate tiers of service delivery. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Training and teacher support, implementation side, right? We want training for our teachers regardless of what they're trying to implement, not only providing that during MTSS, right? And we want to think about teacher support in terms of job-embedded coaching. So if you're not familiar with it, there's been a good body of research on what it takes for educators to not only initially learn a new practice or enhance their clarity around a particular practice, and then what it takes to get that practice in place in the classroom setting. What we know is folks who come to these kinds of workshops and then go back to do the thing can get about 5 to 10% of it in place. We close that gap up to 85 to 90% in practice in the classroom with job-embedded coaching. Right? So think about that implementation support. What does that look like in your district? Do you have a structure for job-embedded learning? Now, that might be teacher mentoring systems. It doesn't have to be dedicated instructional coaches. But that is an implementation support that's going to help close that gap for you. School-wide, we're going to keep that as a component, because maybe not all practices are school-wide, but MTSS is intended to be school-wide. Money for everything, not just for MTSS. We're going to hold that as an implementation support. Comprehensive, depending on exactly what you're suggesting be comprehensive, we're going to bold that as a component for now, and we're going to return to that and see if it still fits. Quality instruction, contrasted with low quality or no quality instruction, might actually be a component. Coordinated could be a how, could be an implementation support, could be something about MTSS in particular that you're concerned about. So I'm going to bold it for now. We can come back to it. On the implementation side, anything that you're trying to implement in your schools, you want it to be aligned with and coordinated with all the other stuff that's going on in your schools and districts. And you all here use the language of cooperatives and corporates. Is that corporations? Okay. I'll learn your local lingo. I'll get there. Right. So anything going on within your central office systems and school systems, you're going to want it coordinated. But there may be a particular component that has to do with defining MTSS. Differentiation, we'll keep that as a component. Proactive, we'll keep that as a component. Mental health, let's keep that along with academic and behavior support as a component area. Let's take a look at that. Whole child, as opposed to maybe just, their left side. Let's component that for now. Let's keep that in there. Data-driven, we've got integrated data systems, so let's bold that for now. Tiers, T-I-E-R-S. We'll keep that one bolded. Partners, the whole community, might be similar to the family conversation we were having. So let's keep that as bolded. It might cross over with implementation supports, but there may be a role for how you leverage your school volunteers and your community partners to actually carry out your MTSS locally. Resources, again, back to implementation support. We need resource allocation, thoughtful resource allocation for all of the various things we're trying to implement in our schools. All students, kind of the same as school-wide, kind of the same as inclusive, right? We could fit it in with either of those. So let's bold it for now, and let's see where we land with that one. So based on what you've just generated for thinking about MTSS, I'm going to go through and do some direct instruction on some components and situate MTSS into all the work that you're all doing in your schools and districts, corporations, and what was the other C word? Collaboratives. Cooperatives. Are they collaborative cooperatives with the corporations? So I want to do a little bit of direct instruction to kind of see if I can clarify a couple of things and kind of point you in a slightly different direction for some things here. And then we're going to do another recheck. So hopefully it looks like good instruction by the time I'm done doing this, where we do a little baseline assessment, we do a little reteach, we do another baseline assessment, then we're going to do another reteach as needed. So in a multi-tiered system of support, in the way that I'm going to talk about it today, I want to think about that as kind of the heart of the instructional work within your buildings, right? The place where curriculum, instruction, and assessment are all coming together for a whole child. And I want to think about all the various systems and structures that also need to feed in and support that good work, whether that be the leadership within your system, at the school or district, at the school level in terms of this. And within S.W.I.F.T, the Schoolwide Integrated Framework for Transformation, we think about educator support within administrative leadership. We think about those two things as very closely related. An integrated education framework, which is going to touch on staffing, service delivery models, schedules that are going to support MTSS, right? I might have a notion of tiered instruction, but my schedule does not allow me to pull that off. But it's this that we're trying to define, and then this functions to support it. Family and community engagement, same way. And what we call inclusive policy structure and practice, again, just multisyllabic words for school district relationships and how you update your policies and procedures within your district to support this desired work to happen. So that's a bigger frame. Now let's go into just MTSS. In the way that we talk about it within the S.W.I.F.T Center, we talk about all students being part of one system and a continuum of support. So although you're going to hear me talk about Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, all, some, few, it's really a continuum of support. There are gray lines, gray areas between these things that we're going to call tiered systems within the multi-tiered system. It's really a continuum of support. So I'm going to present this to you two different ways, and then we're going to engage in a little activity around it. One way to think about a multi-tiered system of support is with this visual, which I find to be particularly helpful in terms of it all being a whole. We're talking about all students within a system getting some universal core support. So everybody experiences first best instruction. What's the first best way I can teach to our school-wide behavioral expectations? What's the first best way I can teach reading and math and science? What's that first best instruction for all students within my system? This sets the foundation for any add-on support, instruction, or intervention for any of our kids in our system. This is seen as foundational in that all students participate in it, regardless of getting other supports. What the research is showing us is that Tier 2 and Tier 3, the additional and intensified supports, have a higher effect for student achievement if they're built on that solid foundation. Even for kids with the most significant cognitive disabilities, even for kids from high poverty, especially for kids from high poverty, and with pretty extensive behavioral support needs. So we want to make sure that this is really solid. Some students then are going to get something in addition to that, some additional support. Their response to that core universal instruction was not where we wanted it to be. They didn't hit our benchmark. They didn't hit our proficiency expectations. They didn't demonstrate that standard yet. So we're going to give a little something more. Now that might be a supplemental dose of the good stuff we did in Tier 1. Right? So some supplemental instruction. It might be more targeted skill level intervention. I can see for you this particular reading skill is what's holding you back in meeting these other standards. I want to target in on that one particular skill and lift that up. And I can do that maybe with 3 to 5 times a week of a 30-minute intervention that I've got that's really well matched for your need. Score, right? Just a little something extra to close that gap. A few students, we're going to find out, are going to need something more intensive for their support. And that's actually a wide range of supports that can play out for students. So you see there's a greater resource allocation for the intensified supports. It's bigger than the universal supports. This is going to include, for most of the kids who are getting intensified support, some accommodations, possible modifications, as well as specially designed instruction that's going to weave through their entire day. It's not just another add-on dose of intervention, although for some kids that may be what fits into that top few students intensified support block. So for some students, we're going to add on an hour of reading instruction because they're in 2nd grade and we're confident that we can close that gap before they get into 3rd grade, and so we're going to do a heavy investment, an extra hour of reading instruction just tailored to your needs, or a small group of 1 to 3 of you within that grade or within a couple of grades in order to close that gap. So a much heavier dosage because we believe we can close that gap. Or I'm using Tier 3 support, intensified support, to mediate for your disability. So I'm a person who has pretty significant ADHD and anxiety. There are certain supports I need every day, all day long. And when I don't get them, audiences don't like me. I become hard to be around, right? So I get that intensified support as a way of helping me navigate the world. Those supports may never go away. I turned 50 this year. I'm still getting the same supports that I was getting when I was 25. Right? So for some kids, these may be forever supports to help them succeed in their day, and they may be aimed at particular skill areas to build those up. So it's not always the assumption of skill remediation. Sometimes it's, these are the supports you need, and it's intensive, and so that's what we're going to give you. Okay. These bars in the middle represent Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and differentiated instruction, which occur in all tiers of the delivery system. Right? We're applying UDL principles in Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports as well, not just in Tier 1. We want to design from the get-go multiple forms of presentation, representation, response, engagement. We always want to be attending to that. And you'll see the notion here of integrated. And this is that movement of the separate RTI and the separate PBIS into one complementary system. And we're going to go into 4 pathways for why we need to do that shortly. So it represents integrating content areas, right? I may present as if I need a certain behavioral support, but then you find out that I'm demonstrating that behavior to escape a certain reading activity. So what I actually need is your attention on the reading. That's going to help shift my behavior. So we want to integrate those together. I don't want to kind of give you supports that are just really not the right match for you. So we've got to integrate those instead of having separate content area thoughts. We also want to integrate our systems overall to develop one unified system of service delivery for all of our kids. Now, that's what in our work we call transformative shifts. So it's second order change, changing of an entire culture and how they think about their roles, their responsibilities, and how they engage. For us, integration represents all hands on deck, regardless of title, as an example. So I saw there were several speech pathologists here today, and I'm really excited that you're all here. Welcome. That's actually part of my formal history, was hoping to be a speechy one day. And instead, I'm doing this. It's all good. Thinking about a role of a speech pathologist, not necessarily as some pull-out provider. Speech pathologist may be a co-teacher in a general ed classroom, helping to deliver tier 1 to all kids, because they're the person that has the expertise, right? And you're going to determine that by looking at your staffing and saying who's good at what. Let's leverage the strengths we have in this system. Right? Maybe that your speech pathologist is delivering some tier 2 or possibly some tier 3. Reading, speech, language supports. Depends on what they're good at, what they're bringing to the table. So regardless of role, we want to integrate across the system. So we call this a non-categorical service delivery model, where we set aside the categorical rules for a second to look at our student data and allow what our students need to drive our allocation of expertise from our system to meet it. And I'm going to bring you through some actual specific resource allocation activities later today. Hopefully, if we're lucky enough to do more paperwork, we'll get to that. So I'm going through a lot of information. I see some of you are rapidly taking notes, and I'm digging that about you. It lets me know you're engaged. I'm going to come at this 2 different ways before we do the next activity. So you're going to hear the information in 2 different visuals. So what I've touched on here, at the universal level, we've got integrated teams of leadership across the building, and possibly grade level teams that are integrated. And grade level teams, in my mind, does not mean just our grade level teachers, but it means all personnel who would have any hand on deck in that universal delivery, using data that represents the whole child to inform selection and matching of evidence-based practices for that core delivery, and a continuous improvement process where we can always look back within grade, across grades, whole school to see what needs to shift. If in our school we're seeing that 33% of our kids are on track in reading by grade 3, this is where we're going to put our energy, is tier 1. Right? That's a big flag that our first best instruction is not well matched. Our first best design of curriculum, materials, resources, and instruction is not well matched, and we're not achieving it. Right? We can't intervene our way out of 33% kids on track for reading by 3rd grade. We're not going to move that by having really heavy doses of tier 2 and tier 3. That's a tier 1 issue. So continuous improvement process. Tier 2, additional support, really similar things. Now we're talking about expanded grade and teaching teams, because there may be additional expertise we've got to bring in for targeted conversations about individual students or groups of students. We're shifting here and moving from instructional approaches possibly to selecting interventions that are targeted to specific skill sets. And there's always that gray area in between. So how many of you are familiar with check-in, check-out? Kind of standard PBIS Tier 2 support. It's an individual student design. Right? So even though we're talking about Tier 2 isn't always groups, it may be individual kiddos. Okay. Check-in, check-out is an example of that. It's a little something in addition to. And then the intensified, and note that the word here is not individual, it's intensified. Because you may have intensified supports that work for a number of students, right? And now again, we're talking about expanded grade and teaching teams, data interventions, and continuous improvement process again, where we're looking across the full day to see if we're braiding the right supports for the right kiddos. Are we having the desired effect? Are we meeting the goals that we set for this intervention cycle? and then circling back around. These expanded grade teaching teams are going to be overlapping with membership of and in strong communication with your Tier 1 system, because Tier 3 is probably a flag that you're going to need to do something special for this kiddo during Tier 1, which is going to look like, 1, not pulling kiddo out of universal support, and 2, figuring out how we're going to make universal work with this kiddo. Okay, so we got a both and there. These are some elements of each tier within the system. That was a lot of information fast. You're all still sitting still. Big questions, like what did you mean by X? Let's check for understanding. So that issue, so I don't know if you, Maria, I don't know if everybody could hear Maria's question, but as kids are going into post-secondary, how does that line back up to what you're intending to do with MTSS? And I want to be careful to draw my boundaries of early childhood through 12 today, and that I'm not here to change your institutes of higher ed. That disclaimer aside, I will offer this thought. This is a conversation that colleges and universities are starting to get into. And we're driving that in K-12 education. We're driving their attention to this. But you're right, it's not the standard of practice yet. So there, I think there's a recognition that's being built, and there are now national projects that are trying to help universities and colleges shift some of their practices. But we're not there yet, you're right. So now let's come back at this with a different, slightly different model. And this is a slide that I have been using for 8 years, 9 years. And it just works. Maybe it only works for me, but other people ooh and ah, and I like that. So if you see something you like, feel free to ooh and ah aloud during this section of the presentation. I have adapted this from the work of Shannon Harkin in Iowa, who, if you know the history of response to intervention, response to instruction, problem-solving models of instruction, Iowa was an early adopter. And so we really appreciate that they did much more crying and bleeding than we had to in trying to figure it all out. And then we kind of stepped off from where they were when we started to collaborate with them. And I say we here from my work in New Hampshire. So this is pre-SWIFT information that I'm sharing with you now. These are not SWIFT-sanctioned slides, and I've tried to code slides accordingly so you can tell what came from the center and what did Michael pull out of his pocket. So this is a Michael slide. And what I love about how Shannon explains this slide is that your axes represent intensity of needs of kiddos, so severity of educational need, along a continuum of supports. And severity of need is not necessarily implying you're not cutting it, you're not making it, so we have to give you more support. It may be your need is that you're really ahead of everybody else in this content area. I've got to give you more challenge. So as we think about gifted and talented, that would be on the continuum of severity of educational need. Right? It's not in terms of like severity of disability. I'll be clear about that continuum. And on this axis is amount of resources needed to benefit. At the core of RTI, PBIS, MTSS models is this assumption that not all kids will have the same resource allocation in order for them to benefit from their educational experience. It's a shift from fairness to justice, from fairness to equity. Right? So a fairness is, I have a pie with 10 slices, and I figure out how all people are going to have the same amount of that pizza. Right? That's a fairness approach. A justice approach, an equity approach, takes into fact considerations like, when was the last time you ate? When's the next time you're going to eat? How hungry are you telling us you are right now? Right? That's going to come to bear in that decision. Are you lactose intolerant? Does this have cheese on the pizza? Right? Whatever those considerations may be, it's more than just let's slice up the money and divvy it out by kid. Right? It's saying different kids need different things. And so let's factor that in from the get-go. Let's kind of own that up front. So Resources are not just money, right? It's quality time with an adult who cares. It's evidence-based instruction and interventions. Resources could be materials that you have access to. I've gone into some schools in some states in our country and walked into libraries that had merely a handful of books. Right? So resource allocation there looks different because of the context of high poverty. Right? Working in a district where the average income is $19,000 a year is different than working in a district where the average income is $65,000 or $85,000 or $105,000 a year. Right? So acknowledging those factors up front, right, as we get into the conversation. So, Tier 1, all kids are in that Tier 1 green circle. Everybody's getting that first best instruction, that high quality delivery of a coherent curriculum with a prioritized set of standards, right? Matched with high impact, high effect instructional practices. Right? In Tier 1, we're also engaged in using screening assessments. How many of you use universal screeners in either reading, math, or behavior in your schools already? Raise your hand. You can be proud. It's okay. Way up there. Okay, just a few. Okay. So screeners help us with what's called predictive validity, predicting if a kiddo is going to have a need. So notions of RTI is we wanted to move away from this like when you fail, then we'll respond conversation into a mode of let me predict if you're at risk. Because if you're at risk, then I want to get you different supports early. I don't want to wait for you to fail. Right? So that's a guiding force behind this model. So here we want to screen 3 times a year. So we start within the first 4 weeks, hopefully, of school, where we're administering a brief assessment that has been designed technically to predict if you're going to have issues in reading, to predict if you're going to have issues around social emotional well-being or behavior, to predict if you're going to have issues in math this year. It's specially designed to answer the "are you at risk" question. Based on that information, I'm going to take some immediate actions. So those results will inform some decisions for me. For some kiddos, I'm going to know within the first 4 weeks of school that, wow, this test suggests you're at risk. I want to get something in place for you right away, right? And we're going to give you a little extra support right off the bat, regardless of the content area. Did you see that? They all moved. It's so fun. It takes hours to make that happen. You're all waiting. You're like, where's the oohing and ahhing? I'm just hearing blah, blah, blah. So screening within the first 4, sometimes 6 weeks of the year. We're going to do that again mid-year, January. We're going to do it again at the end of the year, right? Because we're constantly probing. We're proactive in MTSS. We're proactive. So I'm not waiting for you to fail. I'm going to check you 3 times a year. Are you at risk now? Are you at risk now? Are you at risk now? Because we know life shifts across the year. How many of you have had like a perfect year, no issues in your life? Right? It's all good, all year long. Right? 2016 rocked. Right? Or not so much. So we know that life changes. And if a kiddo needs support in one area, it doesn't mean they need support in all the other areas. And those screeners help us figure out who might be at risk in different areas. And then we can give some proactive supports to them. Ooh, ah, a little dance. Okay, so we're giving some proactive supports, which is supplemental instruction, targeted intervention. We're going to refer to it as Tier 2. It may be Tier 2-ish. Right? It may be somewhere closer to the green or closer to the red, but we're still calling it Tier 2. It's a continuum of supports. In this case, when we're providing those supports, we want to check in with you more frequently than that 3 times a year screener. If I know you're at risk and I'm trying to make a particular change for you, I want to see whether or not I'm accomplishing that change with you as an interventionist. And I want to see if you're back on track and can we move you back to Tier 1 or move you up to Tier 3. So 2 times a month, I'm going to check in with you now, a little bit more frequently. Now, when we do this screening, some kiddos we're going to know right off the bat. Look at them go! Look at them go! We are fast in giving supports in MTSS. We don't waste time. We're in there. Now, sometimes you don't have to wait till that 4th week when you administer the screener because you know certain kids from last year, right? You've read their file. Why wait? Start now, right? Tier 3, something much more intensive. Again, just because you're getting Tier 3 reading doesn't mean you're getting Tier 3 math, doesn't mean you're getting Tier 3 behavior. We're going to tailor that to you. But if we're saying you need more intensive supports, we're also going to commit to monitoring your progress more regularly. So weekly, we're going to do a little probe to see where you're at now, how things are going. Okay? And we're now changing the supports for you back here. So far, so good? Okay. If you're getting Tier 3 support, if you're at that higher risk, I'm shifting what I'm doing for you here. So as I differentiate my instruction as a classroom teacher, if these 2 kiddos are in my class, I'm paying attention to instructional delivery, materials, content choice for them, pairing of different kids within group activities in the room. I'm on monitoring mode here as a classroom teacher. Whether or not I'm the primary interventionist delivering some of the Tier 3 support, I'm having to shift what I'm doing with you. Right? So we acknowledge that up front. If you're a struggling reader, if you're 2 years off in your reading level, and you're in 4th grade reading in a 2nd grade level, getting Tier 3 support, if I don't change Tier 1 supports for you, what's the point? So you're sitting there during a 90-minute block of reading instruction with a text that you can't access. How are you feeling? Right? So we want to think about that relationship and that shift. So far, so good, yeah? Supportive nods around the room? Okay. I promised you I would talk about the 4 pathways in, so let me hit that now. And then I'm going to return to the tiered information. This slide is not in your handout. I made it on the plane yesterday. And it's all going to be all right. I've adapted it and stolen it from Kent McIntosh and Steve Goodman, 2 amazing colleagues who wrote a really fun book on integrated MTSS. If you ever want to take a flip through it, good read. You can find it on Amazon. Where they've been doing a lot of work at trying to address combined academic and behavior challenges for kiddos. And they're seeing a pattern of 4 pathways to that can happen for kiddos. Pathway 1 is you've got a kiddo who's got behavior issues going on that are interfering with that classroom instruction, or that our response to their behavior has resulted in their exclusion from good quality instruction, right? We've got kids in school and out of school suspension who during that window of time are not getting access to that good quality Tier 1 first best instruction, right? So that now creates a combined challenge. We started off with a behavior issue, but now because of that and either how that was interfering with classroom instruction or how we've responded to you regarding that, now we've got an academic issue at hand. Make sense? Okay. Attention, my favorite, where you've got an underlying attention issue that may be interfering with instruction as well, and can have social implications as well. We know some of our kiddos with ADD, ADHD, who socially, emotionally may be having a hard time with their classmates. So they start off with an underlying attention issue and ends up playing out both academically and behaviorally. Could be peer rejection, could be any number of things that are at play. But now we've got a twofer going on for them. Another group who might start off with an academic challenge, and because of their struggles in math, their struggles in reading, they're getting some rejection from their peers, they're getting some rejection from teachers, which is then leading to social, emotional, behavioral challenges. So it started off as an academic issue, but every time it was my turn to read aloud in class, I didn't do so well, and peers started to notice. You started to notice as my teacher, now you started to engage differently with me. That's making me think differently about me. And now that's shifting how I behave in your classroom, right? So we've got this beautiful little cycle that's now made it a combined issue. Again, this is why we want RTI and PBIS to introduce themselves to one another and play well together in the same sandbox, right? Because we know this cycle. We've seen this cycle in our kiddos. And finally, we've got academics, which can then result in more immediate. So instead of the kind of tailored rejection path to an academic issue, we're getting kind of a direct path where I act out during reading because I can't read what you've just given me, and that's how I get out of having to read that in this class. So we've got some escape-maintained behavior around academics. If you start engaging me around my escape behavior as a behavior in isolation, not looking at what's going on for me in reading, you've really missed the intervention boat. Right? It's like you knew it was about transportation, but when your ship came in, you were at the airport. Right? It's like, okay, you're in the intervention realm, but we really need you to specify this. Right? So now we've got combined academic behavior when we actually just started off with a kiddo who was struggling in reading, and we could have resolved that. But we didn't see that. Make sense? Okay, great. So it's part of why we want to combine our efforts there. Now, if anybody really needs this slide, she's like, yes, I want that. Okay. I will send that back to the organizers. Can you post things to your website, this website, after the fact? Okay, great. So my apologies, but sometimes I just create stuff. So there you go. Okay, here are some key steps that we want to be taking a look at for our system, essential components, and for how we're thinking about our decisions. In Tier 1, again, an essential component, having that screener in content areas with predictive validity. Having our research-based, culturally responsive, comprehensive core programs. Right? I don't think I've ever been in a school that has one core reading program in an elementary school. There's always teachers adding something else in. So we never want to limit ourselves to just one box. Although that may be the beginning point of resource materials for us, there's probably more that we have to attend to. Same thing in high schools for that conversation. We want a coherent curriculum that's organized around a prioritized set of standards. One of the largest complaints I hear from teachers is time. I just don't have enough time to cover everything I have to cover. Well, if you're hearing that a lot from your teachers in your building, ask yourself, do we have a prioritized set of standards, or are we just trying to cover every single standard? Do we have a core 15 to 20 standards in our content areas that we're really teaching to? And by doing that, we're hitting other standards. So the research would suggest, and education leaders in general education would suggest, this is a good practice. The book Focus by, is it Schmidt? Schmoker, right? It's a word. Schmoker lays out a nice kind of friendly, usable template for how to go through prioritized standards within your system. If you're thinking about how do I spark a good general ed, special ed conversation coming in as the special educator, it would be to ask this question. Because they'd be like, okay, you know something that I should learn from you about my, quote, expert area in general ed. This notion of prioritized standards. How many of you have clear prioritized standards within your systems? Okay, so there's room to grow. Okay, good. An opportunity for you. You might want to think about that on your action plans at the end of the day. Just throwing that out there. Prioritized standards, particularly if you're like, how am I going to have time to do all this? Right? This becomes the conversation. High effect instruction in Tier 1. We're going to actually do more with that later, so I'm going to hold that for now. UDL, differentiation, fidelity measures, right? So we know what it is that we're trying to teach. We know how we're trying to teach it. We agree on what that should look like. And when it doesn't look like that, I have a way as a teacher to know whether or not I'm doing it as intended. And you as my coach have that same shared tool. So you can look at it and I can look at it and say, yeah, that's really not where I wanted that to be. Okay, so now you can help me get there as your coach. But without a fidelity measure, it's really hard to have coaching. Many of you are familiar with Jim Knight's work in instructional coaching. You may want to look that up. Jim Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, instructional coaching. Brilliant stuff. Jim Knight talks about kind of this core belief that it's really hard for us to see ourselves in how we actually do look when we're instructing. right? So I now have the benefit of going back and looking at all the videos from the Indiana IEP Resource Center to see what I'm doing and not doing based on what I intended in my plan, and now I can do a little fidelity check. But I don't see it from this side. Right? I see it when I actually sit outside of it and look at it. So we have a really hard time seeing ourselves. So fidelity measures can really help us get better. And then progress monitoring within Tier 1 benchmarking as we may have it. Our data sources from screening, our data sources from our classroom-based measures are informing our differentiation, are informing our flexible grouping within our school. So it's not just I'm randomly picking kids, but I'm specifically grouping kids throughout the year based on their needs, based on my materials and resources. Good ooh and ah, kudos to you. Right? Whether that be content issues, process issues, product differences. I'm going to prepare for that learner variability from the get-go, and my framework might be UDL that I use for differentiation. But these groups are shifting throughout the year, probably sometimes throughout the day or different content area as the data is informing me. The end of my Tier 1 delivery, I'm asking, did I do what I intended to do, the F word? And is the response from my students sufficient? So if I don't have 80 to 85% of my classroom responding to that core instruction, meeting the expectations, I've got to look at my reteach options. I've got to look at shifting how I'm delivering Tier 1. So if the response is sufficient, yes, continue, can keep getting better. If no, I'm going to recheck my fidelity. Did I do what I intended? And also, if not, if I'm not getting the response from individual kiddos, I might say, it's time for more support in this area. I've got to bring this conversation to my teammates. Maybe to add on some Tier 2 support. In Tier 2, in addition to supplemental instruction and targeted intervention, I'm now going to start having a profile of student need. I'm probably going to be looking at group level interventions, except for examples like check-in, check-out, which are much more tailored to an individual kiddo. If I'm talking about content areas, I might be doing grouping work. So middle school that I've done some work with has Read 180 as one of their standard go-to Tier 2 in reading interventions, right? Group format, group delivery for that. But I'm thinking also here about what are your particular needs within that content area. So it's not just if the yellow circle here represents reading, supplemental or targeted instruction, there's still going to be focus areas within that that might be better to pay attention to. So if you're in elementary school, beginning reader, there are pretty clear profiles of struggling readers that we have at this point that are known profiles, that have a known protocol of instruction that's been shown to have a high effect for that particular kiddo's need. If between our screening tools and our kind of ongoing diagnostic teaching with kiddos, we can take a guess at what that profile is and match them up, we'll see a difference within 6 to 8 weeks of delivering that protocol if we do it with fidelity. We should get immediate response. But sometimes we don't match it correctly, and so we're going to move kids around. We're going to look at how they respond to our instruction. So that could look like some kids showing sufficient response, and I'm moving them back to Tier 1. I'm keeping them on a little watch list, right? But I'm going to move them back to Tier 1 support. Other kiddos, you know, I review this entire intervention group, and none of them met the goal for that intervention cycle. And when I think about intervention cycles, I'm thinking 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what it is you're delivering. If nobody in a group made the match, made the goal, the first question I'm asking is, did we deliver what we intended to deliver? Right? I'm going to have a coaching conversation with the interventionist. Did we do what we intended with this group? Because we thought we matched them well. Then if not, I'm going to ask the matching question. Do I have you in the right group? Is this the right place to put you? If not, let me take a look at what needs to happen. Is it a coaching issue, or do you need to switch things around or give you greater intensity of support? If I've got a variety of kids who are all showing continued need, I'm going to make some other shifts, right? I might, again, move kids around. It could be I'm taking into factor I've got 2 kiddos in one group who just trigger each other every time they're in intervention together. So I got to get them into separate groups, right? Again, considering behavior, social emotional well-being, and content areas together. That's an example of doing so. And then for other kiddos, I'm like, you know what? The clear issue here is we've got to give you more. We've got to give you a greater dose, and it's going to be more focused on particular skills, and we need some other supports for you in Tier 1. So we're going to increase that allocation. Same questions again for decision-making in Tier 3. We're in Tier 3. I'm looking to see who's responding, who can get less support. So some kids might be coming back to Tier 2 support. Some kids might just be getting less Tier 3 support, but they're still getting something in that content area. This we're doing on weekly progress monitoring, but at the end of a 6 to 8 week intervention cycle, I'm making a more summative determination about what's the next round for you. Again, at Tier 3, if I've got a whole group that's not showing progress, my starting point is not to say, well, it's because you have a severe disability. My starting point is to ask, what are we delivering? Are we delivering it in the way we intended to? Is that the best thing to deliver to that kiddo with that particular profile of need? Right? So my first set of questions are never about the kid. It's about what we're offering and whether or not we're doing well on the adult side. That's what this is set up to do. I see a lot of kiddos who get into Tier 3 support, and it's just this forever sanctioned, you know, I'm doing Wilson forever. Nothing against Wilson, perfectly wonderful set, but if I'm not showing a response to Wilson, find another option for me. And again, it's okay to be moving kids around for different kinds of supports within Tier 3. You notice that last kiddo who moved up might have been the same kiddo that we thought we could lessen the support, and we're like, nope, we're going to go back to full support. Right? His mom and dad are divorcing right now, and it's going to get harder. We're going to give him some more support. Okay? Proactive. So we've got kiddos moving around this continuum of support based on data, based on our individual decisions and their response to our delivery of good, solid practices as intended. So that is the quick MTSS overview. I've tried to put emphasis on some of the things I didn't hear in your component list and left off some of the things that were on your component list. Hopefully that will show the desired result.